called Anticipation in the 21st Century, Transforming the Future. The other way around, Transforming the Future, Anticipation in the 21st Century. And so futures literacy, as many of us practice it and try to work on it today, is largely attributed to him. And in fact, the whole discipline of anticipation, as it has continued to try to emerge, was largely conceptualized by him in partnership with Roberto Poli, who puts on the anticipation conference, I guess, in Trento, University of Trento, every year. So again, if you look up any of those subjects, you'll find Riel's name. So he joined us as a visitor about a year and maybe a bit ago, and since then has come through every half year or so, and we've tried to make sure there's at least a little seminar given to us while we've got him and we can pick his brains. So I think this time he was speaking last week at, in fact, holding I think organizing a conference for UNESCO or with UNESCO at University of Pretoria Future Africa as part of Africa Week, and we began to have conversations about this pluri-epistemic question and what it means for science. And I guess today we'll hear some of his ideas about what that might mean for research, and particularly our interest here in governance. And so we thank you, Riel, for always taking the time to be with us. All of that said, maybe we can do a quick intro around the room and online, get into it, and then we've got a bit of time actually to pick his brains while he's here, which is nice. That's the benefit of a small group. So maybe we can start in the room here and then we'll go online.
Okay, so my name is Oni Rubik. I'm a research assistant at Tayarisha, and it's the first time I'm coming to seminar. I'm very excited.
Welcome.
I'm Kevin Abrahams. I'm an academic at the school.
Kevin Mawatela. I'm also an academic in the school.
So those ones who give a very short title means they have a big title.
In which field?
So actually,
Okay, it's a field now.
it can be helpful.
Actually, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Such interest. Yeah.
Okay. I'm an urban geographer by training.
Okay.
And the kind of work that I look at the moment is around issues of contestation around policy interpretation. So within the urban policy space, whether it's in housing or around placemaking. I also am the research director of the school. And so my interest is, to listen to what you have, is also to think about, school projects in general and how we think about training our students and incorporating some of the elements of your work.
Nice. That helps.
Maybe you want to do the same?
Yes. I mean, during the coffee, I was thinking coffee's gonna be, yeah.
He's supposed to be here. He might join us. He's supposed to be here.
It's almost, yeah. We spoke quite a lot on much more structurally projections, demographic projections, because I'm in demography by training.
Okay.
And then obviously I started to qualitatively start linking this with what it means for the future.
Right.
So that is the futuristic aspect of it. So I'm starting to really like the connection that it has with the governance aspect of it.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm actually interested to learn and see how I can use my quantitative projection, which doesn't always go well, and the qualitative aspect of looking into the future.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Oni, maybe you would also just say about your own research interests. I know you're finishing your master's now. Finishing your master's now.
Finishing my master's, hopefully. I'm researching participation, child participation in public governance.
Child participation. Child. So,
Yes.
What age?
It's very broad for now, but for the it's like since it's as a small child to 18. So
18. Okay,
yes.
so it's youth.
Well,
Not really youth. She said it's not youth.
yes, because youth is when you get to just the teenagers. I wanted specifically about the younger kids and understand how that is the transition. So
Yeah, the UN definition of youth goes to 35. So
go ahead.
So it sounds like we've been speaking to our politicians.
Is it 35 the UN definition?
yeah, because it depends on your context, but because there's so many official or events where there's a youth component,
Yeah.
the Secretariat which contains, which has youth members in it, they go up 32, 35, they can really push.
Yeah, I've always really been troubled by that 35, especially for us people with so high fertility. This value that should be brought down.
Yeah.
It's like 19, I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, I think, South Africa is probably pushing 22 after populations below 22 years old. So there's no way you can have 35.
As you know, variables can be defined for different purposes in different contexts.
Yeah.
I also think I know everyone here, but in which I'm a research assistant to Tayarisha as well, and research interests in like Karen and the urban stuff. With being at the School of Governance has kind of expanded that. So also issues around urban governance, urban innovation, and sort of way I think you really think. Yeah.
And a PhD candidate.
All right. There you go.
Should we go on that?
Yes. Online, can we invite you? Maybe Cleo, we've got your name first. If you could introduce yourself and research interests.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Cleo Mahachane. I'm a PhD student supervised by both Geshe and Karen. My research interests are in imagination-based approaches to the African city using anticipation and futures literacy. By profession, I'm an urban planner, so trying to figure out different ways of understanding urban planning from anticipation processes as well as futures literacy. Thank you.
Thank you. And Molako, we've got you next.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Molako. I'm a PhD candidate at the Global Change Institute at WITS with Prof. Gashi and Prof. Laura Pereira. So my research interests are looking at nature features for biodiversity and climate governance. So it's really thinking about new ways of problem solving to deal with the issues of biodiversity loss and climate change. And I'm here to get some inspiration as I do the last push of my submission upcoming next month. So I'm hoping to just hear something new that will inspire me to just push forward and get this done. Thank you.
Let's try to do our best.
Molako, I'll send you your comments, by the way. Let's get you done. All right. TK, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Please introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is TK Boy. I'm an academic within the school. I think we're supposed to introduce the things we're interested in, right? I missed the first part. Yeah, my core focus is usually local government, local economic development, state-owned entities, scenario planning, and now Geshe is moving me to anticipatory governance. Emphasis Geshe is moving me to anticipatory governance and the like. Yeah, so those are the things I'm interested in. I'm very much interested in the idea of what I do like about scenarios and anticipatory governance and thinking is I think in policy, as the current political environment kind of shows us that we, especially on the continent, should not always be on the back foot. We should start actually getting on the front foot of things. And I think our institutions and governance systems kind of need that updating. Apologies, I'm just in a bit of a noisy place at the moment. Hopefully I was able to say my piece.
Thanks, TK. Actually, we can't hear the noise at all, so you're perfect.
Good.
Okay, and I think with that, we can hand over to...
Wait. So let's see, must be about a month ago or so. I was at a conference in Trento that Roberto Poli hosted on anticipatory governance. And there was quite a debate, I would say, about, first of all, what is anticipatory and what is governance? So both topics were contested, as they should be, I think. I mean, the anticipatory governance bit has been around. I mean, it's been around for a long time. So those of you who know a little bit, I mean, and I've said this in a couple of different circumstances, but when I started in 1982 at the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris at the economics department, we were doing forecasting. And the reason I went to the OECD actually was because I wanted to work on my dissertation, and my dissertation was on structural change in the Canadian economy from 1923 to 1980. I think it was 6 or something back at the time. Yeah, by the time I finished, it was 1982. So I kind of caught up because I finished in 87. But the the issue that seemed most prominent to me was in the context of forecasting and modeling and econometrics was what was the appeal? Why was it something that would have such cachet? Because actually at the time, all the heads of states, I mean, the OECD was the preeminent forecasting organization at the time. You had an immediate impression of the importance and power of those forecasts, because not only were we behind the security wall of the OECD, which was already relatively important then, and people won't remember this, but there was quite a few terrorist actions that targeted the OECD, etc. So there was quite significant security. But the work on the forecast was behind another security wall. You have to have a second pass to get it. And that was because it moved markets. If you found out that the OECD said that inflation was going to be X% and interest rates X%, then you could make some money because it would move markets around the world. But we knew, and I think we know here as experts in the field, that those forecasts are wrong. They're not accurate. And even when sometimes the very high levels are accurate, the underlying composition and actual functionalities or goals are not what they were prior to I mean, for instance, the role of young people or the role of women, to take just a very simple example, is that if you could have a demographic projection of one percentage of women in society, but you would have no idea what that meant for their labor force participation because of the Second World War. So if you'd done something in 1938 or 39, what would you be able to say about 1947, 48? Next to nothing. It would be deceptive. It would be delusional. So I was quite interested in this mechanism, which was actually a mechanism of legitimation and a mechanism of governance. So a fundamental attribute of governance was, and I did a combined degree in political science and economics and social political thought, etc. When I was a student, so I was, fairly well schooled in the issues of legitimation and ideology and politics at that time. And I thought to myself, well, what's really interesting here is the way we're creating, let's call it acquiescence to authority. Acquiescence to authority. You accept those in power as the ones who could allocate your money because they're using your taxes. So you as a citizen are committed to your society because you pay taxes. And that commitment that you pay taxes is, you think it's okay because they're governing on the basis of a credible, legitimate expectation. I will deliver. Give me your money, I will deliver. And of course, this is the dynamic that we see constantly in almost all nation states. But not only was there a kind of illusion, a kind of, let's call it a collective illusion around prediction, forecasting, But there was another component which had to do with the kind of relationship to change and to power, which also seemed rather strange to me, because what you had going on at that time, I mean, maybe I'm talking about ancient history, but people were quite worried that the welfare state, so this is 1982, okay, so this is the early 1980s, a long time ago now. We're quite worried that the welfare state had kind of failed, essentially. So, you know, the promise of the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s was, we've got this wonderful, amazing compromise, which I don't know how many of you know, but I mean, that the kind of the term that encapsulates all that is Fordism. Fordism, which is, everybody know what Fordism is? Fordism is named after Henry Ford, because when Henry Ford started the assembly line, he had a real problem. The workers who were creating automobiles, who were producing automobiles, were craft workers. They were highly skilled machinists, welders, designers, in the sense that they were able to take a blueprint and work with it. So you had highly skilled workers, and the assembly line, which was the outcome of a whole series of technological changes, it took about 50 to 60 years to come to fruition. So that's a whole other story. But Henry Ford is there and he says, aha, I can reorganize the production system because I have electric motors, because I have standardized screws, because I have all these things in place. I can reorganize the assembly line so that an idiot can do the work. I don't need craft workers anymore. So this is a kind of Luddite moment, by which I mean the Luddites see that their skills are being taken away because technology is taking away their skills. During another one of those moments, they're very common in capitalism. And what did Henry Ford have to do so that his workers wouldn't walk off the job? Well, he doubled their wages. And then the ex post miracle afterwards was, because he doubled their wages, they could buy his cars. And so all of a sudden you had a production consumption cycle where workers could buy mass consumption products. Now it didn't happen in a second, but later on it became characterized. Furthermore, the redistributive role of the state, the role of the state in redistributing income, was a way to feed the consumption production cycle. So mass production, mass consumption was labeled a Fordist compromise, heavily influenced obviously by the existence of the Soviet Union, the threat of working class takeover of capitalism, heavily influenced by trade union struggles, profoundly influenced by the Second World War's legacy of, look what the Soviets did, look what they did, which gave a considerable amount of confidence and encouragement to communist parties outside of the Soviet bloc. And so there was a genuine moment of, we're going to have to make some compromises that encourage this Fordist welfare state, redistributive, mass consumption, mass production cycle. And of course, the 50s and 60s showed that it worked fabulously for the OECD countries. When I arrived in 82, we already thought it had failed. Why? Because redistribution was not actually taking place very effectively. Healthcare and education were both defective, not adequate. Everybody was unhappy. They weren't delivering. And so you have in the 90s, the development of mass customization, the idea that you can create more customized healthcare, more customized education, more customized welfare, in the sense of directing it to people in poverty, housing, etc. So you have this whole push in that period, which was also coincident, though, with the Reagan-Thatcher pushback against working people's power, with the famous strikes in the UK, and of course the fall of the wall, the end of the Soviet threat. So why am I talking about all this? It's because I think that this is
Hello, is it still online or is it just me?
No, we can't hear you, Amy.
deliverer of services to the population where your tax money was, well spent, was doable. The only problem was how intelligent we were. We needed to be smart government. So I think you'll forgive me, but I mean, I think it's useful to replay this and make sure that it's clear, is that from my point of view, improving government, improving the welfare state, as it were, is not particularly promising direction. And forecasts are a mass illusion related to what I would consider to be a very toxic relationship to prediction, to certainty, to wanting to control the future. So when I look at the issue of 21st century governance, I'm not going to be looking primarily on how to improve our forecasts or even our scenarios. And I'm not going to be looking to improve the technical efficiency and operation of government bureaucracies. I mean, they're not bad things to do, right? If you want to improve your data, if you want to improve your equations, if you want to improve your error terms, and play with that, that's fine. If you want to review your bureaucratic and become, agile management and the strategic vision for the bureaucracy, I'm all in favor. Go for it. Okay, no problem. I mean, that's what you do because you're there and you do it. You improve what you got, and you're inside the box, and you work to make sure your box works better. But frankly, from the point of view of society, and from the point of view of well-being, and from the point of view of what does it mean to create value in society, in the sense that what is valuable and how does value get shared, created, communicated. The action is elsewhere. I'm not interested particularly in the existing terrain, the existing areas. Now, I understand that that's my personal point of view, and I have the luxury, after all these years of serving as an international civil servant, etc., to be able to shift my gaze from the gaze of how to make good bureaucrats, how to make good forecasts, how to make good scenarios. But I want to make clear kind of what I'm trying to encompass here, which is not these specific per se. And it doesn't, again, it doesn't mean that what I'm saying isn't relevant to the issue of how we think about the future from within planning structures. So planning is relevant. I mean, there's a relevance of what I'm trying to say for planning, and there's a relevance of what I'm trying to say for bureaucratic management in the private sector and in the public sector. But from the perspective of 21st century governance and the question of what is it that we're trying to do for our societies, we have to expand our gaze. We have to expand our focus. We have to understand things outside of those narrow spheres. So if that's the point of departure, if that's the challenge, then how do you do it? What are we talking about? And that's where the pluriepistemic and pluri research and phenomena come into play. Because as we all know, good econometrics, good modeling requires very strict ceteris paribus assumptions. And it also requires pretty good data to be used. And we also know that good data is, generally speaking, not recent. Particularly, I don't mean the actual incoming data, but I mean the variables. So having done a dissertation on national income accounting, I was particularly attuned to the fact that we changed the definitions of the variables and we called them the same series. Who are you kidding? You know, who are you kidding? You change the definition of the variable and you say it's the same series? Nah. Try and look at for instance, data on wages. The definition of what is wages and salaries and hourly changes all the time, and in every country it's different. And you try and compare them with your apples and oranges. So anyhow, I mean, so I'm not belittling that task, which is a really fascinating task. You know, I spent a couple of years of my life working on it, but we need to be able to go beyond that. And it's not simply, I think, a question of quantitative, qualitative, which again brings us to the pluriepistemic side of things. In other words, it's being able to begin or return some senses research to taking into account a much wider range of phenomena. Is it sunny? Is the music playing? You know, was there? I can say this because just the other day, yesterday or the day before, Paris Saint-Germain won the what did they win? Some sort of champions thing. And by the way, South Africa yesterday lost.
Why did you just have to?
So our meeting today is influenced by both of those factors. Okay, and they are not irrelevant. You can't just ignore them, even if so. If our challenge, so you can say, well, it's just really hard to create a variable or to bring that into the equation or create a model or not. So we're just going to ignore it. I mean, that's just not on. Either we're researching society and the world as it is, or we're pretending, we're saying, just leave me on my little island and I'll take care of my little island and the rest of you can go about your business. That doesn't seem to me to be an acceptable proposition. So this really begins to open up the challenge of thinking about how these phenomena are part of the overall picture of what we're trying to understand, which is society, I guess, the world around us. So having said all that, I can put up some slides, I suppose. I had this was my abstract, so sorry. And kind of says what I was
We
saying.
can help you with your slides in the future.
Thanks. I could have divided. I could have divided this up, but I just was being lazy. So sorry about that. But I mean, this is the abstract from my talk. So I figured everybody had read it anyhow. But anyway, but the point that I'm making here is that hypotheses that span different kinds of observations. So this is what I was just saying, right? Is that we have this different kind of data, and the question is, how do we identify and how do we kind of
The king of the gypsies.
makes sense. There you go. Okay, Paris Saint-Germain, they're very happy. And I was hearing from my family in Paris how everybody was, feeling super, super charged up and friendly and happy. I mean, come on. Okay, but I mean, this is not, but this is, I mean, seriously, this is not a minor issue. When I did work, for instance, in the future of Ireland, I was told by many people, including business, government, citizens, that when they were in the semifinals, I think, of the World Cup, so the global World Cup, this changed their perception of themselves. And I mean, there's people who've said to me and over again, I mean, when I come to South Africa each time, there is still reference made to the World Cup being held here and how that changed and altered and created new ways of thinking, etc. And so identity evolves, and it evolves not on the basis just of a 5% growth rate or a 2% unemployment rate or whatever it happens to be. It does not, that hardly captures it. We know that. Okay, so the question becomes, how do we begin to enlarge and include and try to sense and make sense of a broader range of things? So then governance systems are for me about power, agency, perception, and choice, but they can't be comprehended either from one epistemic point of departure. So power, I mean, power is money, power is time, power is knowledge, power is identity, it's agency, it's who's in charge, it's violence against women, so that's agency. I have the agency, which allows me to be violent and to be oppressive. And how do I think of I'm just using this stream of thought, but it's relevant. How do I perceive what it means to be a man? What is masculinity? And then, what does that mean when I start to talk about choice? And where are the choices actually? So perception, agency, and power are going to be very, crucial for choice, because your choices are based on, I don't have the power. Oh yeah, I do. To drop this, I have the power. I mean, if you don't have the power, then you're not going to look at it as a choice. And if your conception of agency is one of passivity, and I'm going to wait for Papa to tell me, or I'm going to wait for somebody with orange hair to say I can make it great again, then I'm sitting back, and my perception is of a world where I'm waiting for those who say they'll make the world safe for me to make it safe. And they tell me that their forecast is based on the best scientific evidence that they have possible. Therefore, it's credible. So they're credible, so I believe them. They're working with the knowledge ecosystem that says the high priest knows, the emperor knows, because the emperor is next to absolute truth, and therefore they're credible. And if I challenge them, they just chop my head off, or some other version of exclusion. So that credibility is, I'm going to perceive the world as flat because they're going to burn me at the stake otherwise. And so, then where's choice here? Choice is down the line, right? So governance as choice is not the first stop in this discussion. There's a couple of other stops beforehand. What is power? What is agency? What is perception? And given that all of those, power, agency, perception, and choice, are not defined by one simple qualitative or quantitative framework, but require us to be able to include drama, age, experience, emotion, trauma. I mean, think of governance in South Africa without the hope of the end of apartheid. The hope of the end of apartheid is a massive ambient force in this society. And currently, and for the last little while, the deception related to that hope, which wouldn't be deception if you didn't have that hope to begin with, right? And I can tell you, I go all over the world and I encounter that. I was in Tunisia at the time of the so-called, now it's called an Arab winter, but an Arab spring. And the hope was palpable. It was like everywhere you could look. And curiously enough, it was a hope which dispensed with all the encumbrances, including traffic lights. because they were an encumbrance, because they were a power, an arbitrary power. And people wanted to be so liberated that they liberated themselves from traffic lights. But why would they have that feeling and that impact on policing, for instance, if they didn't have the sense of the immense hope that comes from oppression? You compact them, you put people in jail, you let them out, and they're overjoyed. And then the moment of truth comes. What am I going to do now that the oppression is gone? So this goes back to the sentient issues of the capacity to be free, which I think is one of the really fundamental shifts in the 20th century with respect to governance and with respect to our understanding of agency, which is to say that the issue is not so much, or not entirely, I should say, there's been a tremendous imbalance, which in part is reflected in our rights-based agenda, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the 10 Commandments as commandments for goodness, the whole directive legal rules-based approach, which stressed a great deal, creating the conditions for. So you create the conditions for, and then people say, well, then you can exercise your liberty if you create the conditions for. But I think that there's another component to that, which is actually the capacity to, the capability to. So if you've been in prison and you get out, you've been in the prison of starvation and the prison of authoritarianism, and you get out of that prison, what do you do with your freedom? And I think that there's a competency or capability-based question that is absolutely fundamental to that. And so there's again a whole set of issues which have, generally speaking, been left kind of to the side, where the assumption is, well, people will know what to do once they're free. But I don't think that's true. I think that's so. What we find is I think that the researchers need to be able to really expand again the kind of issues. And here we come to a kind of ontological moment, which is, and here I would not make ontology as physical, I would physical and virtual, the tangible and intangible. So the challenge of the pluriepistemic is actually due to an expansion of the ontological. The reason that you need to be able to think of new ways and different ways of knowing things is because you actually enlarge the ontology, the what is. And by enlarging the what is, well, you have to use different how-tos given the what is. The way I understand an idea like democracy is not the same way that I could understand this cup. They're different ontologically distinct beasts. And so that leads to this question of how to do that. And on that, given this challenge, multi-ontological, multi-epistemic in a complex emerging world, and I should just add a word on that. The version of complexity that informs my thinking is a version of complexity which is kind of in the Bergsonian tradition, I believe. And by that, I mean that you're not in a situation of causality per se. You're in a situation where conditions arise and then things go pop. And they don't have first movers, and they don't have kind of a predetermined direction. They're emergent and novel. And that version of novelty basically eliminates which again opens up a whole set of epistemological terrains and avenues, okay? Because the way you know something, if it's deterministic, if I lift this up and I drop it, is not the same as the kind of conversation we're having here, where the way of knowing it is going to be all over the place. It's going to have to do with your own history. It's going to have to do with how you're feeling today. It's going to have to do with the fact that there's sunshine. I mean, it's going to have to do with a lot of different elements that play a role in that understanding. The knowing of the how-to, the epistemological of the what. The what is something that is just not so simple as this control. So, in the context of that huge agenda, because it's massive, right? I'm on a very sort of specific entry point. And I like to think that the entry point is very promising, because I like to think that it's potentially a root or a foundational point of entry for human perception, which I guess is what we're talking about. And that's the imagination, but a very specific component of the imagination, which is the imagination of the not past, not present. So the not past, not present has a specific characteristic. You'll notice I'm not using the word future. The not past, not present has a very specific characteristic. It has not yet existed. So there is no data. There is no evidence. Yeah. Okay. Therefore, the only way we can describe the not past, not present is through fiction, is through imagining and using the human capacity to describe something that is not in front of us, that is not there. To do that, we have absolutely no choice but to make a series of assumptions. So it is a modeling exercise or a framing exercise. I like to use the Goffman idea. So any scenario, all scenarios are the result of framing. And I like to distinguish narrative and analytical frames, but that's another conversation. So if all scenarios are all stories about the future, all the descriptions of the future are framed, then where do those frames come from? What are those frames? And given what I've said about pluri-epistemic and multi-ontological, are there different frames for different epistemologies and different ontologies? And how can we identify them and make sense of them? Which is, in some senses, just a pure research question, right? What are these frames? Where do they come from? Why is it different, in Brooklyn than it is in Manhattan? Why is it different in Pretoria than it is in Joburg? I mean, and they're different. We can find evidence that these frames and the scenarios are different. And they'll be different, like I said, if they won the cup or they didn't win the cup. So we see that these frames, the variables that make up the frames, the parameters of these frames, the parameters of the boxes within which we perceive and describe the future as an imaginary thing, and then generate the future's lens that orients our attention in the present, which is the next step. But for the time being, just looking at this question of the frames and trying to get pluri-ontological, pluri-epistemic is already a big research task from my point of view. Now, let's just stick with that for a moment. If we're working on the question of the diversity of frames for our imagination, okay, so these are what I call anticipatory systems and processes. If we're trying to research these anticipatory systems and processes, and we're trying to be consistent with the proposition that they're ontologically different, and therefore there's different ways of knowing, so there's epistemological diversity. How do we do that? How do we make sense of our observations? And here we're in an exceedingly classic, very, very familiar research problem, at least from my 20th century headspace. and this is definitely a limitation of on my part, but I see it not dissimilarly to what's the proof that the theory of relativity is true? What is the proof that there's a quark, a Higgs boson, or a, whatever, a particle, or a biologist? What's the proof that there's a virus or something? What I have a theory that there's a virus, but I can't see it. I have no evidence that I can actually, unless so. You need a microscope, and you need an experimental protocol. So this is all perfectly classic, right? I mean, this is just all very conventional from a research perspective, except the topic are these frames, and the frames can only be appreciated or observed and made sense of if we have a theoretical framework that says multi-ontological, pluri-epistemic. Because otherwise, we're just going to see what we already see. We'll stick to one ontology, one epistemology. We'll just have forecasts, and that's enough. Okay? So that means we need a framework. This is. I'll come back to this because this is kind of the agency issue. But here's the framework that I came up with. And it's an ontological and epistemological framework, and it is a first cut. So I'm not claiming it's, the be all and end all, and that all the terms are perfectly crafted. And in any case, I wrote this now, almost 8 years ago. So my thinking has evolved a little bit from this. But the idea here is that you have different kinds of futures, like you have apples and oranges, so different, or virtual and tangible and intangible. You have ontologically different what is, and you have different how-tos. And here the distinction is between primarily anticipation for the future, which covers AFF, covers AA1, AA2, AA3, AA4, and AA stand for anticipatory assumptions. So they are the parameters of your frame. They're the parameters of your model for imagining the future. Now, most of what we do in terms of imagining that's acknowledged, that's made explicit, and that is validated and valorized is somewhere in the AA1 to AA4 field. What we don't pay much attention to, and over the years I've come to realize that there's much more of AA5 and 6 than we acknowledge or give credit for, because it's about wisdom. And also, one of the things that I've begun to realize, and this is just the last couple of weeks, partly coming out of the anticipation conference, the anticipatory governance conference, is that I've been making a mistake with my tools. And this is just, it complicates things a little bit. But I don't think you can use the same epistemologies. I mean, I knew this already from the point of view of creating the imagined futures. So let me just unpack that a little bit. I guess you'll know this inside out. But when you ask people to imagine the future, which is primarily what I do been doing for the last 40 years, you begin to see what they're using. You ask people to imagine, they go ahead and they do it, and you can see what they're doing. And largely they're forecasting and they're normative, moral, ethical projections and extrapolation. And mostly what they do is AFF, anticipation for the future. And as I was looking for AA5 and AA6, I was kind of expecting that the same process would prevail, meaning that somehow there would be some form of actually the opposite, and this is the reframing, is that there'd be something that would be related to non-extrapolating. So AA5, AA6, anticipation for emergence, I tried to get the microscope to reveal AA5 and AA6 by pulling away the typical utility of the future in AFF, in anticipation for the future. So I'm talking about the way I use this microscope. But I think, now I'm beginning to realize, and I think this is now true more and more of all of the different AAs, 1 through 6, that the microscope can't be used in the same way. And in fact, probably you can't use a microscope as a metaphor. It's probably not a good metaphor, because the rendering of the invisible visible is a bloody empiricist proposition. It's not emergent. So, I mean, part of the discussions I've been having over the last week, which have been really great, and partly, with Bio and others, is that, and there was a woman yesterday who was a healer, and being precedes emergence. And this is actually what Bergson says. He says the real precedes the possible. And it's quite difficult for us to get our heads around that it's not the possible that determines the real, because we're so accustomed to it's possible for me. I have a choice. The choice is right here. Will I drop this or will I not? Okay. And so now I have the choice, and it's the possible which turns into the real. I dropped it. So my choice created reality. Okay. But if you flip it around and say it's the real, the fact that this exists, that conjures up the possible, then you flip it around. And this is where being and emergence, and this is something that I've started to work on quite a bit, are simultaneously present. This brings us kind of towards quantum type stuff too, but let's leave that to the side for now. If anticipation for emergence and anticipation for the future are coterminous, are always present at the same moment, it's just a question of which way you go, which bet if you make a bet, you're in anticipation for the future. If you don't make a bet and you wait for things to happen, in a sense, not to happen. If you allow emergence to become, if you allow yourself to become aware of emergence. So this is, can I feel the mountain? Where was I yesterday? Say that again. Michalisburg.
What are we looking at?
Yeah, kind of hard for me to pronounce. But so in Michalisburg, there is something that can only emerge if I'm in the being of it, if I'm in the reality of it. It's not a causal thing that I can create or that I anticipate in advance. That it's something that emerges in the context. And so one of the things, and one of the reasons that I put the title here on Pluri-epistemic and the difficulty of pluri-epistemic phenomena is that I think we really have to be able to adapt our ways of observing, so research, to be appropriate to the phenomenon. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer, but it's so hard because you get this idea that a microscope will reveal to you what's there. And in fact, with the emergence, that's not true. It's not there. So you can't use a microscope to reveal it. It's not there. It is emergent in the context. So you have to observe it differently. So I've been working on, these were my versions of what these things are about. And they still seem fairly relevant. AA1 is forecasting, AA2 is destiny. So if you have a forecast and you say the horse is going to win, and my destiny is to put the money on the horse and the horse will win and I'll become rich, then you're an AA1 and AA2. If you're saying maybe I should hedge my bets and put my money on 6 horses instead of just one, you're being a reformer. And if you decide not to bet at all, you're self-improving. But that's all about betting. But then when it comes to transitions and novelty, there's some really serious problems. And the reasons that I don't like the term transformation is that I think if you take the idea of transformation seriously, how does a caterpillar know what it's like to be a butterfly? How does a child know what it's like to be an adult? They can't. They're going to be transformed, right? But transformation is something you cannot and the transition away from it, right? And so we can talk about transitions. And novelty is this question of how to sense and make sense of something you do not know. So it's very connected to not knowing, and therefore inventing, discovering, enlarging your perception. And then when we take it down to the ephemeral and then push over to that side of the epistemological, it has a lot to do with the uniqueness of wisdom. And I would want to make the case that wisdom cannot be passed along. Wisdom is experiential, wisdom is contextual, and each individual has their own path of wisdom. When they die, it's gone. You can't do Harry Potter like and take it out of your brain and give it to somebody, you know. And this relates also to a very difficult concept, particularly for Western, the hegemonic Western ways of thinking about not doing, which is an Eastern concept, but I think it has equivalents in many indigenous knowledge systems. Anyhow, so that's my way of characterizing the AA6, and it was, and I think it still is, useful for design. So that's one of the tests. Is a framework, a theoretical framework, useful for design? If I design a process, so let's call them the microscope, the Futures Literacy Laboratories that I developed. If I use that microscope to explore AA1, I can stay inside AA1. I don't need to go outside it. And in fact, I've done this on many occasions when the client, the local champion, was not willing to go beyond forecasts. And there are many clients who don't want to. They have what we call the used future or the official future or whatever you want to call it, and they just want to stick to that for all sorts of reasons. Anyhow, then there's people who just want to do reform. So that's the FFL innovation. So innovation is a big thing. And then I put FLC as consciousness or kind of self-improvement awareness. The idea of an FLLN was novelty, was that you managed to encompass all 6 anticipatory categories. And generally speaking, it's pretty hard to go through AA2, 4, or 6, so the even side. Generally speaking, you can do a little bit, you can do plenty of AA1, a little bit of AA3. Sometimes people get carried away in AA3 because they're very enamored with reform. And you can get a little bit of AA5, which is thinking outside the box, because you've managed to define your box more effectively by using your anticipatory assumptions. Because one of the points to make is that when you ask people to describe the future, they're obliged to describe their box because they have to make assumptions. So you actually get to the frame. You get their frame and you get their parameters and their variables. So it's by the way, I mean, from a research perspective, from a doctoral, postdoc kind of perspective, it's actually a very efficient research tool, because the minute you ask people to define their futures, to describe their futures, you oblige them to define their parameters. There will be jobs, there will be corporations, there will be a climate change, there will be nation states, there will be patriarchy, there will be etc. And then they describe their future based on those parameters. And so it's quite an efficient mechanism for doing that. Anyhow,
We have just a time check, so it's just those questions. But that's fine.
I'm just about to in a sec. Okay, sorry. So I've been trying to figure out what to do next and how to connect all this up. And because a lot of people have been asking me for kind of roadmaps or guides or ways to navigate this complicated framework. So this is ChatGPT. It generated this. I mean, I couldn't draw this, right?
You said you couldn't have misspelled emergence either, but ChatGPT can.
It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling.
It does the strangest things.
Strangest things. Okay, so here, what I started to say to myself was, you've got 2 different terrains, and you're navigating these 2 different terrains. So you're mapping. So from a research perspective, we are mapping. That's what we have to do. So what is it we're mapping and what are the relationships here? And then the thing that I thought was interesting was that could we begin to map the relationship between AFF and AFE? And could we find different ways of understanding anticipation for discovery, anticipation for joy, anticipation for planning, anticipation for innovation, and the relationships amongst them? I have a feeling that I'm being much too mechanical. So I'm very suspicious of my own, kind of tendencies here. But then I this morning I came up with this one. Okay, so I said to myself, now hang on a second. There's an epistemic difference between AFF and AFE. So and this doesn't really work very well. So I said, AFF is like a forest or a jungle, and AFE, and AFF on the bottom is more like agriculture or some sort of organized system. So the villages in AFF are baseline, desirable, probable, likely, and they're quite well organized. And up in anticipation for emergence, where we have the forest, the jungle, the richness of the natural habitat, whatever, you have the village of non-probable, the village of non-desirable, the village of hallucination and dreamopolis. And then what's the relationship between the two? So if I were to begin to start researching and doing a guide, I'd need to be able to kind of take all of these into account. So basta, I'll stop there. Okay, sorry to go on a bit long.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Riel. I hope everybody is still with us online as well. And actually, we still have a bit of time, so we probably can get into some engagement here. And I don't mind leading with one which actually is to encourage Riel just to, in a way, pull it to, I guess, a question, at least that those of us in the room and some of us online might be holding, which is, what do you think? So obviously this is your thinking process and the evolving question of the research question. What do you think it possibly all means for the task of a university, of teaching and learning, and how one thinks about inviting or managing research in this sort of space? What do you think are interesting research questions or approaches that maybe begin to respond to some of what you've been seeing over the years? Or not useful? Maybe that's the more useful question. What is not useful?
No, it's a great question because, I mean, and this is an area that I've been involved in for a very long time, which is what's the future of the university? What's the future of education? What's the future of schooling? What's the future of teaching? And what's the future of research? I've actually done a lot of what's the future of science.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, if the point of the jungle, and you clearly elevated the jungle to seeming to be the better place to be, then do you need, I mean, people like Jinan B actually really believes that education as we've done it it's really quite useless, and what we need to move to is biological learning, because if you put somebody in the jungle, they'll figure it out. So everybody learns on their own. And they learn what they need to know for where they are. Obviously, for that settlement down there, the plant settlement, that's what our institutions are framed to teach around, and that's what we do research on.
Yeah. And ChatGPT says it's pro-iable.
And desirable. And desirable.
By the way, what did you put into ChatGPT to get this?
It's taken a long time.
Oh, okay.
I said I wanted an image
Yeah,
with 2 layers,
yeah.
with 2 terrains. I wanted a river in the middle, and you'll notice that it lost anticipation for discovery, anticipation for voyage, anticipation planets, and it lost it. It disappeared. It's quite hard to get it to do things, and then you have to correct its spelling and all that. And just say, don't add this, don't add that. So I just went through many iterations. I did but I did feed some images into it as well. So there is something called, you may not know about, but there was a map drawn by one of the very first novelists called the Carte de Tendre, which means actually the map of emotions. And it was done in the 15th century, 14th century. And it was a map of emotions. And it was a map, like with towns and villages and rivers and things like this. Emotions, love, hate, grief, etc. So it was all these emotions that were put on a map. It was called the Carte de Tendre. So I used that as a cue, as a prompt to help ChatGPT come up with this. But I mean, it'll take a little bit more time to to get it. But I mean, it's fantastic. Of course, I never know we have to do such a thing myself, much less in 5 minutes, which is what it takes for each of these images to come up. But on the point, Geshe, about knowledge ecosystems. I tend to look at universities, particularly research universities, as the sharks in the knowledge ecosystem. They're the top of the chain. They're the top of the hierarchy. They're the predators. They're the ones that determine. And everybody else kind of relates to them. Now, their position as sharks has been changing the way it happens in evolution, right? Is that the alpha, the predator, finds a new competitor comes into place, or their food stock disappears and they diminish or whatever, or they go extinct because of a disease. Who knows? It's technological and evolutionary. And my sense is that the positioning of the old university as a arbiter and a replacement for the king, basically, and that version of science as truth and prediction and control, is just our universe is not kind to that pretension. So that pretension has been, had a long run actually, in many different societies for a very long time, and we're currently in one of those periods. I have no idea what will happen, where that pretension, and so therefore that niche in the ecosystem, is really not particularly viable, or not as hospitable as it used to be. So as that niche for the university, as the research arbiter changes, there's the open question of what are the pedagogies, what are the research agendas, how do we organize that? And I think potentially, but this is my classic, again, so I have a view of strategy, which is the following. If you're the king, and it's not new to me, right? But if you're the king, you can ignore change. Just be benign. Whatever happens. You can notice change and try and kill it because it's a threat. So your offspring are dangerous, and who knows how much literature we have on that. Or you can be nurturing, which has a relationship to generosity that says, I don't know, I don't need to know, I will support and I will share, an elder kind of thing, and we shall see. Now, universities, which are protecting their turf, are mostly in the mode of let's kill the rest. So they're the monarch that strategically wants to maintain their position on the top of the hill, keep their castle, and all the rest. Well, yeah, go for it. They will, and they'll try their best to do that. I don't know if they'll succeed again or not. Look, to think that if Trump defeats Harvard, that doesn't change the role of universities. It just means which orthodoxy is being served. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not like the role of the university is being questioned. It's on whose side, and this is really not new. Theological, conflict. The high priests fighting it out in the kingdom. What else is new? So I think our challenge, if I put it that way from the perspective of research, is to begin to offer this kind of much more pluriepistemic, multi-ontological terrain as our playground, and to invite and experience and record as best we can the diversity of this. I have the advantage, I think that if I can put it this way, that if this makes sense to anybody, the reason it came to my mind is because I'm dealing with the imagination. Because the imagination is, I mean, these are all descriptions of imagination. The imagination's a hallucination, the imagination's probable, the imagination's desirable. How can they misspell desirable? Anyhow, the imagination's a baseline, it's likely, it's non-desirable, it's non-probable, you know, and the motivations are different, and the relationship to emergence is different. But you know, that's what allowed me, I think, to build a bridge to the pluriepistemic and to an appreciation of the diversity, because I was dealing with the imagination. But it's clearly not the only.
Yeah, sorry. I actually kind of like the response you made, because one aspect that we have to pay particular attention is to what is it that we accept is right or wrong. Up until now, I think everything from the north seems the correct models and the correct frameworks and so on and so forth. And most of what I would call South-South has sort of been disregarded, and yet they play such a major role in trying to create knowledge based on wisdom of our ancestors who have long passed on. I mean, there's many things we don't understand, so we just held on, and we don't know what exactly that meant. And as you were speaking, I was actually thinking that I think in any optimization, there's the logic part, then there's the context part. The problem with the context is that we are all forever buying the context of the people that are modeling the future for us, which is sometimes the elite. So how do we now have a model that takes in variables that capture the context that are a little bit much more neutral, let me put it that way. Like, for example, democracy is a very good model, but the fact that it is imported, it has failed to work as well in the African context, but we hold on to it. Then just another last point. I've been thinking about this quite a lot. I've been looking at the challenges that we are having. Every president who comes in promises employment, which never actually happens. Now that you actually mentioned about the fold forward, I think I need to look it up. And I've actually been thinking that, especially in the African context, the middle class plays such a major role because they also hold onto the lower bottom, which is the so-called black tax. You can come to tell that. But at the same time, I feel that the same money that is used to invest in products that we buy comes still from the middle class. So you kill that particular aspect then. Now, maybe coming back to the topic here, I think it's a little bit, well, let me say not a little bit. In my imagination, and I think you caught me there, I try to model the past based on the contemporary results, because I'm able to see the results, so I can sort of stretch them backwards. And now I'm thinking to myself, and this is in a question that I've always, I think you probably preview to what happened after the economic, what was it called in America? The economic meltdown? The Keynesian
2007.
No, the old one. The
Great Depression.
The Depression.
Great Depression.
Yeah, because after that, what the American government did was they did not just pick decisions this time. They picked the best sociologists, they picked the best historians to try and make projections, and never came anywhere close, despite the fact that everything that could be imagined was actually thrown into that modeling. So I was thinking to myself, in trying to look into the future, shouldn't we probably be concentrating much more on where we should take the situation rather than trying to imagine what the situation should actually be? I'm just, I'm just putting it up because I'm thinking to myself, what if we just, and here again, I'm being a little bit mechanical from the natural science point of view. You boil something into boil, you freeze it to freeze. So what if we actually just started to influence to say, okay, look, this is what the one child policy in China for the longest time did work because that's where we wanted to go. So in our case, we want employment. How can we stimulate those variables?
So you're saying you're arguing for staying down there?
No, not really. I actually want to be up there, but I want the up there to be a little bit much more structured.
You don't like the jungle?
I'm sorry that I made it seem hierarchical because I think that they're both interdependent and coterminous. So you can't have one without the other. This is my two legs analogy. Maybe I should turn them into legs. I mean, you can't. They're both there. Period. That's the reality. The reality is we have bets and we have emergence, and they're simultaneous in every moment. But I think that if I could just respond to the point that creating a much stronger relationship between all four quadrants, because back here there were four, by the way. I think we're always doing all four all the time now, and I think that's in the south or in the north. Aware of anticipation for emergence, and I think we have evidence of that. We have evidence that hallucinatory futures, the joy and dreamopolis are more prevalent in non-OECD countries. Okay. I would argue that it's a question of presentation and what people are willing to admit, but it's a question of what's credible and what's considered relevant. What's considered credible. Yeah. So there's a deep bias, and then you say, well, how can I take the hallucinations of the Yaqui sorcerer and insert them into the desirable future? To me, this is an incompatibility. Yeah. This is crossing the boundary in a way that doesn't make sense. Yeah. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to incorporate an epistemology into another epistemology, and they're incompatible. I mean, this is precisely one paradigm is not the other. It doesn't mean that one is better than the other. And in the context of our world, I think these two paradigms coexist.
So just on that point, I think it's not just also the different epistemologies. I think it's possibly also epistemologies that are not compatible with an ontological underlying frame. So for example, looking at this, if your project is called development,
yes,
then the top layer is irrelevant because that's not what development tries to do. Exactly. So then I would then agree with Prof. K. It becomes then a matter of saying, yeah, we want to be emergent, but we also want development. And then you've got a problem because then I think you've got an epistemological, ontological friction.
But can I throw in another spanner on that?
Mine is on this point, by the way.
Oh, good.
Quick one.
Okay.
I mean, the moment we actually use the ontological epistemology, we are already assuming that we can only create this knowledge through philosophy. What about logic?
Logic.
Yeah, systematic processes. This is now.
Isn't logic part of philosophy?
Well, there is a mathematical version of this, and it's called category theory, but it steps outside algorithmic logic.
Okay.
Interesting.
Okay, so I suppose to latch on to what Geshe was saying, And your last point, which I don't know if I'm going to contradict it or ask you to contradict it. Because you say there's two kinds of epistemologies that might be contradictory, and therefore not you can't join them together. I think the whole point about what you told me to think about is that it's not about being compatible with this at one time and that in another time, but that it can be compatible with different ways of knowing at the same time. So for me, the compatibility argument actually falls away to say that, that's in the realm of spirituality and that's in the realm of logic or whatever, because they are true at the same time and they are useful at the same time, and then we can both know them at the same time. So it's not about saying it's about either or, because what your talk made me think about, and I think it's the first time I thought about it at School of Governance. I used to, when I did my undergrad, it was English literature, and was studying some of those classics like Voltaire and I'm sure you know Candide.
Yes.
And it's this idea that something is created as it's known, and it's both the utilitarian value and the imagined idea that plays on each other all the time. So your talk just invoked all of those kinds of things, that those imaginaries that come from literature, like the Lilliputian idea of the two cities on top of each other, like this, and how they can coexist at the same time, but it depends on who the viewer is, and who the observer is, rather than what is the observed as a kind of ontological reality, I suppose. So, I mean, the question it still made me think about is, does this way of thinking, and not about incompatibility, but about multi epistemological views that can happen at the same time, is there utilitarian value to it? Or are we replacing the utilitarian with imagination that we say it doesn't matter about what's utilitarian, because it's not what development does, for example? Are we just thinking for imagination's sake, and that's the end point? And it links to Kay's question about, can you then engineer something? Deliberative governance is something that, and we should marry governance. So deliberative governance is something that I write about. And is it possible to engineer something to produce the kind of future you imagine? Because we are working with two epistemologies, logic and planning, and something that tries to bring the intangible down.
No, so I agree with you. Yes, all along the line. So yes, I agree with you about the simultaneity. So it is both at once. But this is the question of how we research the different gaze and being able to distinguish the two. Because despite the fact that they're simultaneous, there's the challenge from a research perspective to observe them in their integrity. I mean, it leaves you with a challenge about that. And I don't have answers per se, and particularly on the relationship, because you'll notice that the way I'm drawing the relationship is I really don't know. And I think your point about literature, because literature has a very, very, very interesting relationship to all of this. On the one hand, literature has a more holistic perspective because it's telling a story. I mean, in the same way that a film does. It's more sound, image, everything. So and when we read, we fantasize, and in our fantasies, in our imagination, we add all sorts of stuff. So it's more holistic, inherently. But there's something very curious, which coincides with anticipation for the future and the kind of planned world of it, is that many of the stories that appeal to us are stories of sequential causality. the hero's journey. You knew this, you knew that, you knew this. And this relates, I think, to your last point about utility, is that if we inscribe utility in the hero's journey, then the great visionary, the great leader is the one who needs to take us there. And the version of utility that we're using is the utility for achieving the vision. Okay, so we're completely in anticipation for the future. Right. So the way that I come at this, and I think your point about deliberation is a very interesting one. But the way I come at it is to say, first of all, you need to take a big step back on pretension or arrogance. And so this comes back to power, agency, and perception. Is that we do not create the future. Humans are not creating the future. This universe is just really unbelievable, and things are emerging and entangling and connecting, and most of it is not us. It's just all the things that are happening all the time, and the coincidences and the experiments and the conditions and the happenstance and it's not our intentionality or our state power that's determining the future. So once you take a step back from that, then the deliberative side, or let's call it the dialogic side, becomes one of learning. So it's rather than the difficulty I have with both participation and deliberation is, again, my own bugaboo. That means my own vulnerability, in a sense, or my own bias, which is I'm trying to make the invisible visible. As if it existed.
Yeah.
And so the point that you make about the things emerging at the same time, the Candido thing, is that for me, a dialogic deliberative process needs to be able to create space for not doing, not knowing, as much as it creates space for knowing and doing.
Yeah.
And therefore, we need to design, and this is a design challenge, our democratic deliberative governance processes in such a way that they're much more about learning. So not knowing, because you can only learn if you don't know, than knowing and just implementing.
Right.
But that means, just by the way, just to finish the thought, that means, that we need to really come to terms with the unbelievable oppression of maintaining the existing system. The existing system is so path dependent. It requires so much maintenance. We have to run these organizations to train people who are going to keep the lights on, okay, and keep the enterprises running so the enterprises keep the lights on, and to keep the accounting systems going so the budget that allocates the money to the universities that keeps the lights on. And we are spending so much time, energy, life, force, maintaining anticipation for the future, because somehow we think that that's going to be everything and that we can get everything from it. And I think that, this is a fundamental. So just to finish with the utilitarian point part, I just think, there's lots of different ways of talking about this. None of them are particularly adequate, but we're not at home in our universe. We think we're special. We think we're different. We're alienated. And the evidence is abundant. We kill each other. We kill other creatures. We destroy our planet. We are toxic for our own home and for each other. And we all have to have pills and mass consumption to keep ourselves drugged so that by the time we die, we're not completely, going crazy. So, the species is very adaptable to pain. And we've created a world of immense pain. But it seems to me the utility of this more open, more holistic perspective is less pain. That doesn't mean less suffering, because I think conflict and happiness and sadness are part of this whole picture. but or let's call it cruelty. I think we can live with much less cruelty. We're a cruel species, and that's something I think we can hopefully grow out of. But we've had a couple of thousand years and we haven't made it yet.
Hi, George.
So,
We've perfected.
yeah,
So I think a few people might start leaving. So I just want to see, I saw there's a comment online from Mulako saying that she has in her work, her fieldwork, I don't know if you want to voice in Mulako, but the PhD she's finishing was based on fieldwork in Zambia, where she's saying she did encounter examples of hallucination and emergence in the research. Do you want to say anything more, Mulako, or is that just a comment?
That was my comment. Just a lot to think about that now that I have these fantastic stories with things that are honestly otherworldly. What do I do with that? Do I just leave it and stay in the space of not doing? Or does this mean something for governance? So a lot to think about.
It's actually a very good question, Malako, because what I was thinking as you're saying that is that I do think there is a real hierarchy, except the hierarchy is the other way around.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, to the extent that let's take our own school, and maybe we can talk about it. So sometimes I think we talk about the university. I think there's the university as an institution, and then there are those of us as actors in it who I think also have some discretion. To the extent that we may even allow the kinds of research that are more anticipation for emergence, there's always that requirement at the end that you have to talk about what the policy implications are, right? So we're still saying that you have to tell us how it's useful or what you're actually doing, right?
Yeah.
And that to me is interesting because I think it does suggest that even where we might be open to something that perhaps is a little bit more open-ended, there's still this desire at the end to say, but there's got to be utility. It's got to be useful for what we describe governance as being, which is about maintaining as a concept. And I think that's interesting.
I have an opposite. I think that's where we should be starting now.
Start with the policy relevance.
Yes, and I say this because I think we've gotten so used to the structures and systems created for us, and we do some of those things very implicitly, and they become not useful.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Okay.
And I've been talking about, we've been talking about this decolonization of curriculum. And I don't think we can do that without, first of all, teaching individuals to appreciate and learn about their various contexts. And package whatever we're going to teach them as according to how they look at things. Then we're going to be creating things that actually are applicable and useful to us. At the moment, I actually feel, look at even, let me use it. Not that I'm being defensive. Let's use the old ring. If I publish in a journal which is international, I actually get high points. I'm speaking to that crowd, not to our crowd. If I do it in the local journal, then you get very minimal points, and they doubt you whether or not it makes sense or not. And that's where the problem is. Mm-hmm. So we're creating, but we're not actually creating something that is useful to us. And maybe somewhere else, the science is that it's more internationalized, but for us in governance, I don't think we're doing justice to ourselves.
But when we say what is useful, so there's an element of that, I would say, within the framework that says, yes, it's more useful to us if it's in our journals, which might suggest that it's speaking to our issues and it's accessible for people. So that's kind of fairly clear. But there's the other question of useful, which is, are we saying only policy is useful?
No, in fact, let's even add to that. One of the other major aspects, I'm following on your earlier, the first question, is when are we going to actually stop just being much more individual and institutional? Because you get 100 students here, you train them into something, they go to various institutions and they get absorbed. So there's actually no impact. If we got the whole institution, the whole department, the whole anyway,
ambitious.
Well, I think if there aren't any other comments, I think at least this has been stimulating in terms of beginning to think about this. I wanted to share a small story that when we were in Pretoria last week, there were a couple of conversations or a couple of mentions of schizophrenia and zombieism, which was some acknowledgement that I think for many of us in academic space, we sometimes find ourselves appreciating more than we can bring into the academic project, meaning that we might actually simultaneously be existing in both spaces, and whether it's our spirituality, or in fact, the fact that we hold multiple ontologies. I think many of us are multi-ontological at the same time because we know what we've learned, but we possibly believe other things as well.
Yeah.
We may not believe them at the same time because they may be the work version of us.
That's typical us. I mean, I ask everybody, you're a dictator in your home and you're an executive. When you become a democrat? When you get in the car or when you leave the house?
It happens so many. Right. And I think those are important conversations for us to raise. I mean, we gave a lecture here last week. You were there, Riel, and I was very surprised in our own school of governance to discover that our own marketing manager is a Sangoma. Who knew? I didn't know. I've known her for years. I've never known this about her.
You didn't?
Yeah, I had no idea. And it actually shocked me because I've been working quite closely with her and had no idea that she has a whole belief system which really tends to define a person, which she's felt she has to manage in a particular way because of the environment we're in. Now, that's a manager. Many of us are educators, which I think is quite serious. And so how many of us, I think, perhaps might also want to entertain this question of what it means for us as educators, and then for our students who come to us probably with the very same kind of schizophrenia. And I think the job of the university, and I'm not necessarily just pointing fingers at this school, I also did my PhD here. I think the job of the university has been to beat everybody into the same box we were trained in, which is to get them to understand how to.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And I always remind my students, if you're going to walk out of my class with one definition of evaluation, then I've failed you. Yeah. I want you to go with your own definition of whatever I'm actually teaching. Hence the reason why I'm in school.
No, I think it's great. And I think what issues like curriculum reform, I'm hoping, can begin to introduce some of these less sort of operational questions and deeper questions about what it is we think the academic project is, what is the 21st century school of governance, and then I think, as introduced by Riel today, how could we really think about these multi-ontological, pluri-epistemic issues, and as we do that. So Riel, I just want to thank you for your thoughts. With the slides be available, that people are interested. So Amy can make sure she shares those. I see she recorded the session, so we normally pop that on our.
So there's a paper attached, right?
There's a transcript as well, but the MS Teams transcript is usually not the best. Yes. It must be Adobe.
Put the recording to another.
The recording, yeah.
You can put this.
Is there an audio paper that could be shared along with? Is there a particular one from 8 years ago? Or maybe the one that's today.
We're listening.
Plenty of papers to share, but this is kind of the latest.
The chapter I just asked you for, so it's one of the more recent versions, the handbook chapter that you wrote.
That's perception choice. That's relatively. I mean, all this is on my research gate.
Okay.
So I put everything on research gate.
Okay.
I just put it. I just put it. I mean, all my stuff is open source, and even if it's behind the Springer paywall, then I put it just a raw version.
Yes, because I was trying to get, he wrote a chapter for a handbook that I wanted to read, and we couldn't access it as bits because it was on Springer. And then I tried to use my UCT library access, and even on UCT, even though they're subscribed, I can't access the article. So it's like really hidden.
No, it's insane. It's it costs 500 euros to buy that. 500 euros.
It's quite funny. You should actually be reaching out to the librarians. They always find a way. They'll either show you how you could do it, or they'll do it for you.
That's a good idea. I normally just call a friend, but I think that's a good idea.
The one who's quite very active is the deputy called Maya.
The librarian.
Yeah.
You know, she keeps saying you. With enemies. Sometimes the enemy has the solution. They say keep your enemies close.
Look who's talking about enemies. Look who's talking about enemies. Particularly, all right, emails and I'll calm down.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you online. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Riel. Thanks, TK. Thanks, Rafa. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
I
Thank you.
Listen.